So good afternoon, good morning, good day to everybody. Welcome to this new session of new season, of CEOS Cultural Economics online series. I'm Elisabetta Lazzaro, Professor of Cultural Creative Industries Management at the Business School at the University for the Creative Arts in the UK, CEOS Coordinator. I'm together here with the part of the CEOS team with Andrei Schracker, who is in charge of the special session. And we start with a book launch on cultural funding and financing, a guide to new and traditional models in the arts and culture. The mini-symposium will be moderated by Carolina dalla Chiesa and Anders Rykkja. And so Carolina is an assistant professor in cultural economics and organizations at the Department of Arts and Culture, Erasmus University in the Netherlands. And Anders Rykkja is a lecturer in Arts and Cultural Industries Management at Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland. So the floor, Carolina and Anders, is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta, for this very kind introduction. So without much further ado, because we have a lot of things to get through today, I will do the introduction. So the book we are about to introduce you today is entitled Cultural Funding and Financing, a guide to new and traditional models in arts and culture. So essentially, what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to give you a brief introduction about the book, or essentially the rationale for why me and Carolina invited a number of contributors to contribute to a volume on funding and financing the arts. We will have a presentation on 4 of the chapters of the book, followed by an open discussion. And then I will give the word back to Elisabetta, who will have a short conclusion and a wrap-up. So essentially, the book, which will be published in January 2026, will have 18 chapters. It presents new as well as what we call traditional or the core funding models, which means that the core funding models we will be looking at are things such as public funding, both direct public funding in the forms of grants and the indirect in forms of fiscal incentives and tax rebates. We will look at patronage, philanthropy, sponsorship, copyright. Before we move into also a presentation of what we then designate as sort of the newer models, which are mostly sort of the digital or platform-based model. For example, crowdfunding, crowd patronage, social media monetization, public-private partnership, match funding, and streaming models. There is also a third section which has a few case studies to illustrate how actually stakeholders, meaning artists, cultural entrepreneurs, organizations actually have adopted or are trying to adopt some of these different models. The presentation we will have from this book are more or less equally divided between the various sections. We will have a presentation by Aline Albertelli, which will be looking into the role of public-private partnerships. Bonet will have a presentation about his chapter on direct government expenditure on public funding or cultural policy informed tools and mechanisms for funding and financing. We will be looking at a case study from Brazil on how digital platforms can be used for co-creation between audiences and players and leadership and management of a symphony orchestra. Before also Elisabetta Lazzaro will look at digital funding and financing in the context of museums and cultural heritage. So one of the things Carolina and me in the introduction has been doing some thinking around is, why do we as educators, researchers and practitioners need a model on a book, basically, or an edited volume on funding and financing? Well, funding and financing is, after all, a perennial problem in the cultural and creative sectors and industries. Carolina was a bit cautious about me having this model, which some of you might recognize as actually being the what we would call the long tail, or Anderson's long tail from 2006. As we all know, the worth or validity of that model is somewhat disputed. I mean, Anderson, about 20 years ago, had this sort of rosy vision that there will be ample opportunities for the majority of artists and producers in the long tail to actually be able to monetize and provide funding and have funding or financing coming from the sales or the sales or distribution of their work. What we know after 20 years is that the whole long tail model resembles more what Rosen already 40 years ago talked about, meaning that it's just another manifestation of the superstar economics, which means that digitalization may not solve the issue of funding and financing or access to adequate provision of that, but it might give us some new opportunities. And some of these opportunities might not be as well understood as they should be for us to be able to move both research and practice forward. First of all, we think that it's important to have a book on funding and financing because there's a lot of conceptual ambiguity around it. So this, for example, this definition from Klamer et al. Is one of the best sort of discussions about the distinction between funding and financing we've found so far in the cultural economics literature, meaning that Klamer, Petrova and Mignosa situated that as a similar thing, basically. In the book, we're trying to make a bit of a point out of the fact that funding, to some extent, is the various sources we may have, and financing is more a question about how do we actually assemble or put together these funding sources into models, and how do we actually manage to actually make those models viable in terms of, can we actually pay for them? Can we actually make them work in practice? Another backdrop is obviously that there is a reduction in public funding, which is a perennial issue across the cultural and creative sectors and industries. In the case of Northern Ireland, we've seen a reduction of 30% of allocations to the Arts Council over the last decade. And we also see that Northern Ireland, as a country, provides far less per capita funding to culture compared to other developed nations of the UK, such as Wales or Ireland. This isn't sort of like a specific case, but we think that context matters, as it does in research, which means that in many contexts, the access to public funding has diminished to some extent. I will let Lluis provide us with more ample empirical discussion around that topic. But this third thing is the fact that we have also been witnessing digitalization and platformization. We see that platforms and digital distribution and consumption of arts and culture is becoming more prevalent. Some of these platforms are simply spaces for marketing, for distribution, for dissemination. Others, like Kickstarters, Patreon, have a more, should we say, a specific function in terms of funding or financing, while others again, such as Steam and Wattpad, which also are on the bottom left corner, are used for distribution purposes. So these things means that there is, yes, indeed, a need for more understanding and more focus on the funding and financing. So next, what we are also, which we can sort of discuss in the discussion part, is that we're looking at launching a network here, which we basically are calling FAND, which is Funding for the Arts Network, which could be a platform we could use to discuss research on funding and financing arts and culture more specifically. So with that, I will actually end this first introduction because we have a lot of presentations to get through, and I will give the floor over to my dear friend and colleague, Aline Albertelli, who will present to us on new and traditional forms of funding the arts and creative sectors. So, Aline, please upload your presentation. The floor is yours. You have 9 minutes.
Hi, everybody. Hi, and thank you, Anders and Elisabetta. I'm gonna upload my presentation. Can you all see it? Yes, perfect. So today I'm going to present the chapter on new and traditional forms of funding the arts and the creative sector through the role of public-private partnership, which I wrote with my co-writer, Anna Mignosa. So this contribution wants to analyze the dynamics, the evolving dynamics of cultural policy and governance by focusing on the role of public-private partnership and in general alternative governance tools, collaborative tools that can lead to alternative financing mechanisms for the cultural sector. The focus of our chapter is specifically on countries with a strong public intervention for culture and who have established ad hoc laws to introduce public-private partnership, which allowed us to have a better comparison between the countries, specifically Brazil and Italy. The research question is it possible to create alternative ways to support culture by establishing different governance models? And with this, we mean, is it possible to, instead of giving directly the water to the horse, leading the horse to the water? And more specifically in this chapter, we want to analyze the extent to which PPPs have been leveraged to address financial and operational constraints faced by public cultural institutions, but also private. The theoretical framework behind our chapter is, first of all, on the identification of the different models of governance which have characterized the development of the management and governance style in Western countries, going from the public administration management style, which was very vertical, to the new public management and new public governance style, which is very horizontal in the way the activities are shared between the public and the private individuals. Then we analyze the gradual introduction of collaborative governance strategies in the delivery of public services, and also the trend in Western cultural policies to reduce the role of public sector and at the same time decentralize the level of decision-making, shifting therefore responsibility to private and mixed public-private entities, which have been recognized as the destatization and decentralization trend. Our theoretical framework finds and selects three main reasons that have led to the shift towards a more decentralized way of organizing cultural heritage institutions, which are the governance shift that I mentioned before, so a general change in the way the public institutions govern certain spaces. Financial constraints, which we are all very aware of, we have way more cultural heritage and cultural activities coming in and fewer resources as the time goes on. And then also cultural developments, which can be all found, can find their biggest results in the Faro Convention. So more things are required by cultural institutions, more activities, and also more is thought of the contributions that individuals and the communities surrounding the cultural institution can give to the production of culture and the management of the same. The effects are therefore a more autonomy to cultural institutions, in certain cases the complete privatization of cultural activities or its ancillary services through contracting out activities, or the introduction of tools to encourage the interaction and collaboration between the public and the private sector. We analyze a specific kind of tool, that is the public-private partnership, which is a contractual agreement between a public agency and a private sector entity through which skills, assets, resources, risks, and rewards of each sector are shared. Very often we mix public-private partnership with sponsorship or contracted out activities. Here we really focused on a form of a relationship that is horizontal between the public and the private, and that is not vertical, therefore, with an entity that asks the other to do things as a client and a supplier relationship. So here, the public sector as a partner has more of a regulatory role and provides administrative support and facilitate the investments on the side both of the public and the private. And then the private sector says supports and provides financial and human resources and skills that normally are more efficient on the side of the private. The case studies that we have selected are from Italy and Brazil. As we said, we selected states that were more commonly, traditionally characterized by a centralized mode of governance, and that have recently adopted ad hoc laws that allows for the introduction of the private sector in the management of the heritage sites. The tools are the special public-private partnership within the procurement law of Italy and the Organização Sociais, I'm so sorry for the Brazilians here, in Brazil. So the policy aims of these two tools are, on the one hand, in Italy, to fulfill the public interest goals by redirecting private resources towards heritage that has been a bit abandoned, like minor heritage sites, and making it valuable for the community surrounding it. While in Brazil, there is an explicit need to change, to give an alternative to the public governance and management by introducing a structure that completely deals with it. The cases are municipality-owned monastery in Italy and a World Heritage Site in the north of Italy, and a World Heritage Site owned by a public university in Catania in Sicily. While in Brazil, there are several national museums. What have been the results that we have analyzed? There are on operational efficiency that has been, we saw results on the side of operation, on the operational side, the financial side, but also on the social side, meaning that operationally wise in both countries, we saw a structure that is more agile and more flexible and capable of strengthening its human resources and increase the collaboration with the surrounding community. On the financial end, we see a capacity of raising funds and restoring and enhancing the cultural heritage site, while providing also more activities for the community. And we see also a tendency to reduce the dependence on the public funding. And so just that I introduced the discussion point, I see that the time is short. What we analyzed is that by giving more autonomy and the possibility for on the private end to take care of these public heritage sites, there could be a tendency of attracting more private investment towards cultural heritage sites that are minorly known, but also activities that normally remain unaddressed because they are less interesting from a private point perspective. But we also analyze a tendency of creating more bottom-up activities that are actually important for the community surrounding the good, and therefore also more closely related to the Faro Convention or other activities that are promoted at the European level and not only. I will leave these slides for the discussion and leave the floor to my next colleague. Sorry for taking 1 minute more, and thank you for your time.
Aline, thank you very much for your presentation, much appreciated. And in terms of timing, you were spot on, no problem. So may I now give the floor over to Lluis and his presentation. So Lluis, please, without much further ado, it's your turn.
You see the slide?
We see the slides, yes.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to present my chapter of the book. I will be very synthetic. I've reduced my presentation to 3 slides. So my chapter talks about 3 main topics. The first one, I tried to analyze the literature analyzing the efficiency and the legitimacy on direct government expenditure and cultural issues. So that's the first part of the chapter. The second part, I collect data from many different countries. I tried to find as much as possible, even though, as you will see, most of the data available are European data. And finally, I tried in the chapter to do some reflections that could be useful in terms of developing future research. So what the current lecture tells us about direct intervention by governments in the field of culture. So there are some arguments have been analyzed. So government could correct market failures of public goods or the externality generated by merit goods. Also could safeguard cultural diversity in the sense that guarantees the survival of traditions or activities that the cost is higher than what the potential audience can pay, and also is quite important from a territorial point of view because it ensures better territorial and social access to cultural goods. But of course, there are as well critical arguments. So the idea that it could foster dependency, inefficiency, or even bureaucratic inertia, reduce the ability to innovate and to respond to true audience demand, even though, of course, the concept of true audience demand is something which is not easy to say. Of course, the commercial culture versus the governmental supported culture is always a discussion about this. Also, it could reflect political interests. So there are ideological biases. And finally, probably this is the most important critical argument, the anti-redistribution effect, since it mainly benefits groups with higher income, level of education, and cultural capital. So in a way, the equity objective is not attained, or there are difficulties to attain. So some of the critics of this, especially coming from the global south, is this is a Western liberal approach who has sense in the reality of Western Europe, on the North America and other countries, but not in general in the world. So I think we need much more arguments coming from other parts of the world with different values. But that's the problem. The problem is that we don't have a lot of data coming from different countries. So UNESCO collect data from 57 countries representing different regions of the world, but only connected to one of the SDG indicators, the 11.4.1, which is the one about governmental expenditure in heritage protection. So that's the only one. The problem is that data is not homogeneous and belongs to different years. The OECD also collects data, but only for OECD countries, and most of these countries are European countries, so the data really comes from Eurostat. The problem again here is the level of aggregation, because the data comes from this big group of recreation, culture, and religion, which could mean different things in different countries. I analyzed the evolution from 1998 to 2022, and I will show you some data later. But of course, we don't have enough disaggregated data in order to analyze cultural policies. I also tried to get data from other sources. So I founded a document on Latin America and the Caribbean, about 14 different countries, also about 16 large international metropolis, Also, of course, quite a lot of single countries data, but this is not easy to make comparative analysis. So the limits: full representation of non-European countries, highly aggregate data, so it's difficult to do in-depth analysis and subsectorial and public policy instrument analysis. Of course, we can have a little bit more at the European level, but not nationally. And finally, direct governmental expenditure only shows one side of governmental support to culture. So, and one of the reasons is that it's quite difficult to get tax benefits, how they contribute to culture. So that's something which, of course, when we analyze and we do comparative analysis at OECD countries, the case of the USA, for instance, or even the case of the UK, is not show enough for this reason. So here I just show you one of the many graphics and tables I collected. Here I'm showing you from one side, from Iceland, the country who spent the most of the governmental budget on recreation, culture, and religion. So it's the 2.3% of the total budget of the public administrations. That means local, regional, and national. And the country of this group of OECD is Greece, with only 0.3%. Okay, so these are data from the 2022. So we see that in general there are smaller countries who spend more in culture, but there are not very clear things. Of course, you can see that United Kingdom spends very little, but of course this is just direct expenditure, so not the tax benefits. But the case of Italy is very, very surprising. Not the case of Greece, but yes, the case of Italy. In the columns, what we see in the columns is what happens after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So I try to analyze the evolution of the expenditure or the direct expenditure of culture from 2010 to 2022. And you can see that only 4 countries increase, which was Hungary. And Hungary, you can see, it's a country that used to spend a lot and is increasing quite a lot. So this is connected probably of the kind of government they have. And in the other extreme, in the right extreme, we have the case of Greece, coming from very small amount of money expended in culture. There is now this very high increase, but it is because after the crisis, really, they cut so much and now they are coming back a little bit to the normal situation. But what is more interesting of this graphic is the large number of countries which are reducing their direct expenditure in culture. So, of course, we need to analyze more carefully the data, but these are the global aggregate data that we have. So, sorry, I make a mistake here. Yeah, so some analytical consequences of this. So I think direct funding, even though it's not maybe don't explain everything, in any case, is very important because it tells a lot about the model of cultural policy. It is connected to the general model and praxis of public intervention, to the economy, not just culture. So there is this connection. So it's very interesting to analyze how the relationship between governmental policy and economy, and I think culture is one example of this. Also, I think public funding makes transparent and explicit the values and objectives of governmental policy, its priorities, decision-making patterns, etc., which sometimes is not as clear in countries where tax benefits are more important because it's decided by the taxpayers. But in any case, it's interesting to see that there are, even in these countries, some mechanisms that allows to influence taxpayer decisions. Also, it raises fundamental questions about efficiency and effectiveness. So about the political and economic legitimacy of this kind of expenditure. Also, we see that there are biases which are, especially in the interpretation of the control frameworks, connected to the research or the origin of the analysis is done by different researchers. So that's something which Marcus just underlined many years ago, and I think that continues happening today. And finally, the low capacity for in-depth international comparative analysis with the available data. That's really clear because it's not enough. We have the data from some funds like the Council of Europe cultural policy analysis, but even though the level of in-depth analysis is not enough. So we need more international comparative studies. I believe this is the final conclusion of my paper. Thank you very much.
Lluis, thank you very much. So without much further ado, because we have a lot to get through, may I now have the honor of giving the floor to Alice Demattos Guimarães, who will present Co-Creating Digitally, the art of funding cultural projects through crowdfunding practices. Alice, well, it's yours.
Thank you very much. Do you see my screen? I hope so. I cannot see the you anymore.
We can see your screen. We can see your screen.
Thank you, Anders. So yeah, I'm not going to repeat the title. This is the chapter co-authored with Natalia Maelle, who is also here. And this is just an overview of what I'm going to go through. It's quite a quick talk, so I'll go to the introduction. This is actually very much related to what Anders already introduced when talking about the book. So one thing that I wanted to point out is that the first crowdfunding platform was actually created by a group of musicians, but there is this thing that artists and the cultural sector in general seems to be lacking behind in how crowdfunding developed in other sectors. And then in this chapter, we want to understand, because we do believe that within crowdfunding, there are a lot of potential for co-creation. Our research question is then framed under which circumstances digital funding allows or gives room to co-creation. So in terms of theory, we delved a little bit into the alternative finance of crowdfunding, of course, explaining a little bit that there are many or different types of crowdfunding within investment and non-investment logic, and the arts especially use the non-investment logic in the models of donation and reward. But in crowdfunding in general, regardless of the model, there are way more benefits beyond this monetary aspect of raising funds. And co-creation is one that can really synthesize a lot of them. And we use the work from Quero and her co-authors to look into the different types of co-creation that can happen within a platform or within a crowdfunding ecosystem. And we also introduced this idea that within co-creation, there is also co-production. And in a goal of expanding how we understand cultural creative crowdfunding. And for looking into these potentialities, we delved into the case of Orchestra Ovo. This orchestra is located in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, southeast of Brazil. And they came to life in 2019 as a music project, but also social project for giving music students in the university and who didn't have a lot of, were marginalized in some aspect. And the idea was to give them our experience that was as good as the symphonic orchestra of the state. And it was actually the conductor and all the professors inside the orchestra were actually musicians in the Philharmonic of Minas Gerais. They had the first concert in 2019 in December. Then from being volunteer orchestra, they become orchestra of formation and transformation in 2022. And in 2024, they became a center, almost like an NGO. And the question is, where is funding within all of this, and especially being such a social engaged initiative? One thing that is very interesting about this case is that ovo actually means egg in Portuguese. And the whole project that Ovo made for the funding was around this analogy with egg, chicken, farm, and they decided to launch a subscription campaign, so a monthly campaign, a continuous campaign on a crowdfunding platform from the city where they are from Belo Horizonte. This platform is called Evoe. And how they created the campaign within this analogy was always following like 3 different types of benefits. And they had very clear how they allocated the revenue that they got monthly. Within 50% is for educational activities, is for the training of the musicians to keep the mission that they became to life alive. And it is interesting to note as well that 8% of the funding is actually allocated to getting more money through the more traditional funding mechanisms, such as public money. And of course, there is the fixed cost of management and the fee for the platform. So getting to a little bit of our insights, I'm not going to delve into this conceptual model that we suggested, but the fact that this orchestra, being such a socially active and being in this intersection of social art and excellence art, makes this co-creation of value a reality. And some of the points that we really have to understand from this case is that digital funding can facilitate co-creation, but there is a need of the digital platform to be a participatory space. So the platform, in this case, I'm showing here Evoe, which is the platform that they use. Evoe is a platform that has really in its core this idea that crowdfunding is much more than finance, is about collective development. So they really interact with the project, actually. In fact, it was Evoe who approached the conductor of the orchestra to share this idea of the subscription channel. And of course, there is to have an alignment of the artistic value with the community engagement. Then, I mean, you are going to know your audience, so to construct the campaign according to this, to your values within this idea of keeping engagement. And of course, the transparency of the funding process makes a lot of difference. And at the end of this chapter, we want to argue that understanding cultural creative crowdfunding, we need to understand from a multi-angle perspective, in which this is a term from Carolina here, crowdfunding is a chameleon tool, and it's going to change how you interact and how you practice crowdfunding according to the need of the case or the project. And ultimately, the crowdfunding for the creative sector and the cultural sector is about co-creation values in the diverse socioeconomic context. So it's going to be different according to where you are, which project, and so on and so forth. And of course, OVO is a very unique and illustrative case because, again, intersect artistic excellence with a very strong social initiative that really understood how digital practice can foster co-creation. And they really interact with the audience, with other social medias, and even with the way that they develop the channel and in connection to other kind of platforms and how they are still developing is quite unique and worth having a look. So that was that for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alice, for this very insightful and wonderful presentation. I now give the floor to Elisabetta Lazzaro, who will present her chapter, which is about digital funding and financing in relation to cultural heritage. So, Elisabetta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anders. So now I take off my hat as CEOS coordinator to present the last sample out of this quite rich book. Can you see my slides?
No, we could, but now we can't.
And now?
Yes, now we can.
Very well, thank you. Yeah, so this contributed chapter is based on a quite well-known research issue, which is that traditional public and private support is shrinking, so challenging the financial sustainability of the CCIs, and at the same time, from a technological perspective, we are assisting at a rapidly growth of the fintech in different sectors of the economy. And this is an opportunity for the CCI because the CCI are elaborating technology-driven and collaborative funding models where crowdfunding is just one example. The focus of this contributed chapter is on an emblematic sector of the CCI, namely cultural heritage and museums. Why is that? Because while museums and cultural heritage have been characterized by a rather early adoption of new technology in areas such as study preservation, promotion engagement, the adoption of new technologies for the purpose of funding and financing is rather lagging behind. Yet we can assist at some cases of experimentation in the adoption of digital funding and financing. The contribution of this contributed chapter is a case study explorative approach showcasing best practices in different models of digital funding and financing. And the further challenge of that is that I focus on smaller museums. Why smaller museums? Because opposite to flagship museums, they are characterized by limited capacity in terms of artistic collaterals, institutional business and financial networking, financial resources, and specialized human skills that, as we will see, are fundamental ingredients in the adoption of digital funding and financial models. So, a little synthesis on museum finance. The financial architecture of museums is characterized by high levels of fixed costs, structural market inefficiency, suboptimal allocation of resources, uncertain demand, and market failure. Because of that, museums crucially depend on steady income that traditionally has been assured by public subsidies and traditional forms of private funding. And different institutional settings imply different levels of public and private funding. So what are the current trends for what concerns cultural heritage and in particular museums? Also here there is an increased entrepreneurial approach, including in their financing. And there are forms of rather innovative private financing, such as bank lending, which depend, unfortunately for smaller museums, on collateral capacity. That is, especially flagship museums with important artistic assets, collections, artworks, can assure, but is more problematic for small and private museums. We can also see that larger and more established museums are experimenting tech-driven financing models, which is supported by their more important capacity. So, the use concepts in this contributed chapter, the approach and data, an important distinction that I advance, the distinction between digital funding and financing, where digital funding is the adoption of digital models of financial support, where there is no expected financial return as such, but this gap is somehow compensated by cultural and or social benefits. And I also allow for digital financing, where digital models of investments expect a monetary repayment. So I explore on an international basis different examples, different case studies, selected on the basis on how these small museums are able to exploit these innovative digital models of funding and financing. The data used are secondary, using scholarly industry and media. So please feel free to explore the chapter to better dig in the different examples. Here I just present a few of them. A small museum based in Utrecht in the Netherlands, which is quite an example for reward and donation-based crowdfunding. They really personalized the use of reward and donation-based crowdfunding, also to build a loyal community. What about another model that is contactless donations? Here a nice example is offered by the National Museum of People History in Manchester in the United Kingdom, which was able to raise a significant amount of funds thanks to this tool. Continuing with these different models, we have digital payments for ticketing and purchases provided by the Royal Albert Memorial Museum in Exeter in the UK. Then we can move in the US, and here there is a bridge with sports and culture, loyalty programs and digital tokens developed by the Museum of Kansas City Chiefs quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. So if you are also a fan of American football, this is a quite nice example. And then what about digital financing that, if we want, is relatively more challenging to adopt, in particular in the sector of cultural heritage and museums. So here we have rather so far rare examples, one offered by Château de la Motte Chandelier in New Aquitaine in France. Which is able to exploit investment crowdfunding, so there is a return expected. And what about NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and blockchain? Another example coming from Northern England in Manchester, the Whitworth Art Gallery at Manchester University. So what are the main findings to wrap up about these case studies? So digital funding is, as expected, more diffused than digital financing, but digital financing exists. There are the adoption of these different models is for the short-term financial support and also for the longer term audience development and loyalty. Some financial models do not depend on the size and capacity of the museum. That is the good news also for small museums, is that they can exploit these models. However, there are other models which imply more complex technologies such as AI and NFTs that demand partnerships with specialized technology providers, therefore impacting their business models, the business models of museums. So to conclude, there is in such a technology, from the financial perspective, sector which is the sector of cultural heritage and museums, an increasing experimentation of a variety of digital financial models, and these models are aimed at both short-term and longer-term impacts and benefits. However, there is some technological capacity constraints and specialization that is required. What about further research? Well, the avenues for further research are at least a few. First of all, to expand to other CCI sectors, and also to further dig in digital models of financing, that is with an expected return on investment. So thank you very much.
Elisabetta, thank you very much for this insightful presentation, and I would also like to thank Alice, Lluis, and Alice for equally insightful presentation. So this brings us to the end of the snapshot or small tasters you will have of 4 of these 18 chapters of the book. So we have about 35 minutes or so now for a general discussion or questions even about the book. So, I mean, anyone is sort of like free to take the word. I will, with the help of Carolina, try to moderate us through this discussion. Yeah. So we have Lydia here with a question. So Lydia, please, the floor is yours.
Oops. Good morning, good afternoon all. My name is Lydia Denumo. Some of you may know I work at Institute for Statistics, and I'm in charge of the monitoring of SDG indicator 11.4.1. So thank you everyone for the presentation, which is quite interesting. And I also would like to mention that we work a lot with your group, like Elisabetta and also Anna Minosa. We were in Jamaica a few months ago. So it's really important, all the work you're doing for my work in cultural statistics. So I would like to refer to the presentation of Lluis. So thank you. Just to update you, now we have 74 countries for the SDG on public finance, on public expenditure. But I concur what he said regarding the challenge to undertake any international comparable analysis, because we have a lot of blanks in our database. And it's there is not, countries do not report data on consistent manner. So it's really challenging if we would like to undertake any substantial analysis or comparative analysis. I just want to mention that it was in 26. In the previous year, we worked with Elisabetta, try in fact to estimate some of the missing data in order to have a more comprehensive database. So we're planning to undertake this next year. So at least you will have a better data if you want to undertake any study. And also UIS will review maybe policy just to publish just indicator, to also publish raw data, which is, I think, sometimes easiest if you want to undertake any analysis. You know, you can start with the raw data to undertake analysis. And I would like to mention also, we will publish a compilation guide on SDG 11.4.1. And for this, I think I will refer to this publication. So that's why I would really want to look at it. As said, for all the agency, we're looking at for the post-2030 agenda. So it's really important to get any feedback to know, you know, what will be important in the future in terms of indicators and monitoring. As you know, UNESCO tried to have a goal for culture in the next round. We don't know how it look like, but in order to improve data, and I think maybe the first step is just to have even public and private expenditure in culture, while we even have so much difficulties to look at the subcategory heritage. So sorry, I took the floor a little bit too long. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lydia, for your insightful commentation. Lluis, maybe you might like to say something about Lydia's additional information about data availability.
Thank you very much, Lydia. I think that UNESCO is doing a great job on improving the framework of cultural statistics that was presented last September in Mondial Cult, and I was there, so it was really amazing. I think it's, but of course, as you said, the data, when you try to do comparative analysis, these are very aggregate data, first. Second, the way that governments give data to you sometimes is not enough homogeneous to do this kind of comparative analysis. So what I tried to do in my chapter was to try to explain a little bit, try to collect the data in order to share this data and the different sources, but also to try to underline that we need more in-depth analysis on specific cases, because cultural policy cannot be synthesized in a single data. We need to go deeper. And I think that we need to do both things. Comparative analysis, and not only with an Eurocentric approach, which of course that's one of the problems, that most of the data comes from the same countries all the time. And it's important that the world is very wide, and it's important to incorporate other points of view, not only from Jamaica, but of course as well from Jamaica. But really, no, I totally agree. And I think the people who works on this have to add forces in order to know better and to do deeper analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lluis. I see we had a question here from Attila. You had your hand raised. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just to back up the previous question, for me as a Hungarian, it was really interesting to see that how large the number of the Hungarian government to 0.97. But I would to ask about the sources of the data and highlight that putting together the expenditure in recreation, culture, and religion all together is skewing the numbers in Hungary really much, because in Hungary, in the last 10 years, we built 27 football stadiums, for example, that I had to translate the numbers. It is 1,500 million euros. In the meantime, it was because of the corruption. It used the building to redirect the EU fundings on that, and the culture or side of these 10 years looked really different. Actually, my point of view might be a little skewed as well, living in this country and experiencing how culture is where we're heading to, and how hard it is to work in culture and working with cultural economics. So I'm really interested in how these numbers should be elaborated, and how to show objective numbers in countries like Hungary, where the corruption is really hard to move us to.
I totally agree with you. I wrote a paper for the International Journal of Cultural Policy analyzing both the case of Poland and Hungary. So of course, but in any case, the OECD data is in this very aggregate level. We know that recreation, culture, and religion, which includes sports, is huge. Eurostat has some more detailed data, but not enough at all. And I think we need a case analysis in order to show how this expenditure could be used in a very different ways. But for me, it's not surprising that Hungary is the country who increased the most that this recreational, cultural, and religion budget in comparison to other European countries. So that's why sometimes we think, okay, is it a good thing? Well, depends. And our role as economists is try to show the data, try to do a comparative analysis, and of course to show the asymmetries of that. But that's part of the job. So we need more case analysis.
Thank you, Lluis. Carolina, I see that we've had a couple of questions coming through here in the chat, so maybe you would like to look into some of them, particularly those from Aziz.
Absolutely. Do you hear me well? Yeah.
We hear you really well, Carolina.
All right, great. I'm just gonna think about these two questions with you, and I would welcome anyone who's willing to also take the floor and comment on what Aziz is mentioning here. I also referred Aziz to a publication, another more focused on cultural policy entirely, which may be interesting for you. But here we have the question of whether the patronage system is incompatible or compatible with public intervention, and the idea of autonomy in the sense that is it the goal to reform state structure or to create parallel non-state mechanisms? I think I can answer based on my perspective and others, at least the perspective we try to use in the book. I do not believe that the goal is to completely forgo the state public intervention within within cultural support. So we do propose the reformation of state structure to combine more private support and more hybrid mechanisms, mechanisms that allow co-creation and more partnerships. So this is coming from a very pragmatic view that in a situation where we have a decrease of public funding across many countries, and to be fair, maybe historically it wasn't even that larger in the past, but we did enjoy a period of quite a lot of profusion of public funding within cultural sectors. We are proposing that hybrid systems can be the way ahead when we think about public and private together, when we think about collective crowdfunding. Match funding, for example, is a great opportunity to explore the ways in which collective, individual, small patronage can get together with public funding and enhance cultural support. So I don't think we're looking at them as in exclusion, right? It's not either the public or private or patronage. It's like the ways in which we can put them together. And of course, since those modes of funding are perhaps more, let's say, updated and new on the digital realm as well, like Elisabetta Lazzaro has mentioned in her presentation, the next step would be understanding the ways in which they go together, the ways in which they contrast, what are the management and organizational issues that we have to endure in order to make such partnerships work. So what I'm pointing out here is that when we have solely a public funding happening, or solely a patronage happening, or only a private funding happening, they have their own ways of institutional organization. But when we put them together, new challenges appear. So these are my 2 cents about your questions. Is looking ahead, we have to consider more hybrid modes rather than excludable options. I hope I made myself more or less clear. Anyone here willing to contribute to this question and give an opinion? Andrei.
Hi, thank you. Presentations were very interesting. The question is for Lluis. You mentioned that the data that problems of cultural statistics with data and similar things that we know about. Do you hear me?
So
you hear me? I will try to repeat, or I put it in the chat. So the question is clear. You have a lot of data. Were there any attempts to model this, and how, and why not? What would be shown with modeling with the data that are accessible, and how to model it?
I had problems to understand you. Maybe if you write in the chat, it will be easy because I understood more or less, but not the specific questions.
Yes.
Sorry.
In the meantime, if the discussants allow me, I would like to continue the issue raised by Aziz. I think that there is plenty of room for experimentation, and it is great that you bring your perspective from Morocco, because it's very important to combine the different policy settings and how these allow more or less to experiment with different forms of public and private support for the arts, culture and creative industries. I think that there is plenty of mix of different models, different contaminations. So the field is really open, is really dynamic. With this book, we really tried to draw a recent history, but also to project towards possible trends in the near future. Of course, without pretending to be exhaustive, but to stimulate the debate that we really hope will continue also on the platforms we are willing to build, and that Anders mentioned early on at the beginning of this mini-symposium.
So thank you, Elisabetta. So Lluis, we have the question now from Andre in the chat. So maybe you would care to have a look and maybe comment.
I was just answering in the chat as well. Yes, of course, we can think in a model. Of course, we need to incorporate some extra data in order to see, and that will depend on the hypothesis that we could develop. I'm also taking into account the different contexts, how we explain the different contexts in order to, but yes, why not? It's not something that, thank you very much for the suggestion.
So, Carolina, do we have any other questions in the chat at this moment?
So from what I can see, we don't have another question here. We do have still, I guess, 5 minutes, right, Elisabetta? So we're willing to welcome any other questions.
So we have plenty of time, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And if not, if there is no one, I can also pose one question back to the authors, but I prefer to give the floor to others, as I think I have put too many questions already in prior stages.
Of course, okay, we are samples of the contributed chapters, because there are other chapters that could not be presented today. So, yeah, so the book is really richer of contributions.
Maybe we can share the table of contents.
Sorry, what, Lluis?
No, I was just suggesting to share the table of content. So that means that all the people participating today can know about the other chapters.
Yeah, maybe Anders, would you be willing to copy paste it in the chat for us?
I can do it. I can do that. But meanwhile, since I can see some of your faces here, and I see that Douglas here has his camera on. Douglas, you did a chapter on crowdfunding for the book, so would you maybe like to sort of give everyone a 3-minute synthesis of that chapter?
About 3 minutes. Nice to see everyone. Yeah, I'm very happy and proud to have a chapter in this great book. My chapter is about crowdfunding, especially in the Kickstarter context. And it's an overview of how it has evolved in the last 15 years and how it looks very different today than how it began, and what we might learn about that, about how it's used. And part of the lessons I want to highlight is that it's some of the biggest value it provides is less as a mechanism for funding and as much as a mechanism for networking and information provision and information gathering. So it's, as economists, I love to think about money all the time, but really there's a lot of other currencies in life. And I think crowdfunding tells us a lot about the information we can get from it as much as the money. While I've got my microphone done, I would put back to the organizers here. The initial slide you put up, Anders, about FAN, F-A-N. I'd love to hear more about what your plans are and what your dreams are for this kind of network.
Well, yeah, thank you, Douglas. I can easily answer that question. So what we have basically done is that we soft launched the idea of FAN during the RCE conference in Rotterdam. So the idea behind it is basically to get a group of researchers together who are interested particularly in, I mean, a lot of the empirical research we do, say, for instance, is that we take for granted that the resources or the money is already there. And then we look at what happens or what agents or people do once they have the money or have market functions, provided that people have sort of goods or services to trade or sell. But if you go one step under, how do we actually make goods and services ready for the market situation? How do we actually combine the public with the private and the digital? So the idea about FAN is basically to get together a group of people who have a particular interest in understanding the resource acquisition process that artists, organizations, cultural entrepreneurs have, because we think that it's an interesting, fundamental, perennial problem which hasn't really been discussed that much, we think, explicitly. Particularly, we were surprised to see that there wasn't really a lot of discussion in the literature. We found more literature in the development literature on distinction between funding and financing than we found in the cultural economics literature, for instance, which was kind of surprising in a sense. Yeah, that people weren't more interested in sort of differentiating between the two. So the idea yeah, you want to. Yeah, continue, Carolina.
No, I was gonna add that we also want to put people together, so that's one first reason. And I'm putting our both emails here in case anyone in this conversation today wants to join the FAN. And we, of course, FAN plays with the idea of fandom, and I think it's better to have more people than less comparing and contrasting data, especially in the context where comparable data is also hard to find and hard to proceed with research. So anyone could email us. We're going to put forward a website towards February or March 2026. The idea is that if we also have a good critical mass involved, we can try to apply for funding with people involved in this group and collaborate with future research projects, minor or larger, right? It doesn't matter the size of potential projects. It matters that we can share our inputs in one place. I think the information about funding, financing, cultural policy, also connected to the arts, is quite scattered in different contexts, different geographical regions. We maybe too ambitiously would like to put them together. And yeah, I think the original idea is very much like honestly a place to connect. And there will be a platform online, and once it's available, everyone will get to know because we're going to share them. So that's it.
We're also looking at next year of hopefully having at least one special issue on the topic of funding and financing, which, I mean, all of you might be interested to contribute to. So we can't, I mean, I don't think we can give you all the details, but it looks like there might be one call at least going out over the summer on the topic. So yeah, that's the start basically. So the idea is sort of how far can we take it? And I mean, Other things also, I mean, going back to cultural policy and the look at data, for instance. So I can just give you some insights into some research me and Carolina are going to do, just to give some ideas about how we could actually develop data at the national level to then afterwards do comparisons. Is that in Northern Ireland, I have been granted access to an unbalanced panel data set, which is a survey the Arts Council do to all the cultural organizations who received funding from them, which means that there is data going back to 2009 until this year. So what the Arts Council in Northern Ireland does is that they put out a survey where all the organizations have to sort of not just give their public funding, but they have to sort of state their own income, their level of capital investment, if they have done a crowdfunding campaign, sponsorship, philanthropy, patronage, alongside sort of facts such as obviously their audience figures, the number of production employees, size of the organization, etc. With that kind of data, I mean, obviously, because they get capped 5 to 10% of their funding if they don't fill out the survey, it means that you get a pretty good picture over time in what direction funding or financing in a specific nation goes over time. If we had partners, say, either at the federal level or at national level in other countries who could do similar types of survey, then obviously that makes for some interesting comparison between nations, which would be much more granular or fine-tuned than what's the Eurostat data, which just gives you a lump sum under recreation, sports, etc., which, as Lluis also discussed here, can be and Attila also in the exchange, so that can be quite deceiving at times, because I mean, football stadiums, arts and culture, yes, football is sport, is culture, but you know, it's maybe not arts, and yeah, so that was, pardon the rambling, but that is sort of like one idea of things that could be collaborated on between people, for instance, as an idea. So this is one example of what we could do with FAN, for instance. So any other comments, questions, feedback? Well, Elisabetta, in the case that we have sort of exhausted the option for questions, maybe we should then be looking at winding down this session.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much to our lovely discussants, Anders and Carolina, for the great job. We all look very much forward to the book. So it, as far as, according to the very latest news, it will be a perfect Christmas present, because it is expected to be released on the 24th of December. So, and moreover is in open access. So what a perfect present we can make to each other. So my invitation is to join us in the new year for the next upcoming CEOS. So the program is quite rich. I shared with you plenty of details, and of course you are more than welcome also to actively contribute to CEOS. Should you like to present on any topic in cultural economics, and also related disciplines in the social science and the humanities, because we also like interdisciplinarity. So what I can say, I wish you best greetings, best wishes for the end of the year break. Of course, plenty of serenity, of peace, and friendship for the new year. We really need that. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next month, hopefully. Thank you so much also to all the presenters.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.